Welcome to True Heart Touching Stories, where we believe that the most important journeys are not the ones that take us somewhere new, but the ones that bring us back to what we should have seen all along. These stories will make you feel things, they will make you think, they will sit with you long after the screen goes dark. And some of them, the best ones, will change something small and permanent in the way you see the people around you.
He spent a year pretending to be poor, then she said something that destroyed him: structural variation, a report tree structure type name, the misread. Benefactor structure category, false perception, art core, narrative premise. A billionaire deliberately conceals his identity and wealth to test the people closest to him, only to discover that the person he was testing was already the only one who never wanted anything from him. The story pivots when he realizes his test has cost him the one relationship that was always real: emotional progression path. Control and superiority gives quiet curiosity, gives growing doubt, gives emotional blind spot revealed, gives psychological crisis, gives humbling realization, gives vulnerability, gives earned resolution psychological conflict type. The tension between the need to control perception and the fear of being loved for the wrong reasons, versus the terror of being truly seen. Narrative trigger. Event. The billionaire overhears a conversation that he believes confirms his worst suspicions about someone.
Correct.
But he is misheard, misread, and misjudged everything. Structural uniqueness. Explanation. This is the first story produced under this system, so no prior structures exist. This arc is built on a false perception engine. The protagonist's worldview is factually wrong, and the entire emotional journey is driven by that gap between what he believes and what is real. Monostator. Safety confirmation. Fully original premise. Characters and structure. No real individuals referenced. No reused content. Ellie Voss did not see him for another 4 minutes. He knew this because he watched the second hand on the clock, mounted above the nurse's station, which was the kind of thing you notice when you are sitting very still and pretending not to exist. For minutes in which she moved through the corridor with the efficiency of someone who had learned, through necessity rather than nature, to be two places at once. She spoke to a nurse named Donna. He knew Donna by name because Ellie had mentioned her 3 times in casual conversation, which meant she mattered, handed over a folder. Accepted a different folder, said something that made Donna laugh, and then turned toward her office. She stopped. She looked at him the way she always looked at things she wasn't expecting, not with alarm, but with the slight recalibration of someone honest enough to register surprise. Marcus. Not a question. Not quite a greeting. His name identified. The way you name something before you decide what to do with it. The syllable landed flat and inadequate, and he heard it immediately. She walked toward him slowly. Not cautious. Ellie was never cautious exactly. She was considered, which was different, and stopped a few feet away. Her coffee cup was in her left hand. There was a pen tucked behind her ear that she probably didn't know was there. "At my hospital," she said. "I know." 8:45 in the morning. No. She looked at him for a moment with an expression. He had cataloged before, but never quite solved something that lived in the narrow space between amusement and something more careful. Did something happen? And here was the thing about Ellie Voss that had undone him from the beginning. She did not ask, "Are you okay?" the way most people asked it, which was a social noise, a formality, a door held briefly open before moving on. She asked what she actually meant, which was, "Something in your face is telling me something. I'm choosing to ask about it directly." She was precise that way. Economical with language in a manner that made every word she used feel load-bearing. "I just needed to see you," Marcus said. It was the truest thing he had said to anyone in a very long time, and it cost him something to say it, and she seemed to understand that it had, because she didn't push. "I have a meeting at 9, she said, "but I have 15 minutes. Come on." Her office was small in the way that hospital administrator offices are always small, functional, slightly overfull, a room that exists to solve problems and not to impress. There were 2 plants on the windowsill, one thriving and one in visible decline, which he had always found quietly characteristic of her. She kept the dying plant. She had not given up on it. She set her coffee down and sat across from him in the chair she used for meetings, which was not behind her desk but beside it, angled toward the visitor's chair, an arrangement he had noticed before and thought about. She didn't want a desk between her and the people she talked to. She wanted eye contact. She wanted to be readable. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't. Is this about us or about something else?" This was what he meant. No preamble. No tactical softening. "I'm not sure yet," he said, honestly. She nodded slowly. Not satisfied with the answer, but accepting it. Ellie had a particular relationship with incomplete information. She tolerated it better than most, which he suspected came from years of working in an environment where uncertainty was structural and waiting for full clarity was a luxury you rarely had. "Okay," she said. "Then talk to me about something else first. Work backward."
We talked.
Not about the gala. Not about what he'd heard. He talked instead, and without planning to, about a memory that had surfaced at some point during the long, sleepless night, something from when he was 9 years old. A summer his family had spent at a house on the coast, and how there had been a boat, a small wooden sailboat that his father had rented and didn't know how to sail, and the two of them had spent an entire afternoon going in circles in a small cove, not going anywhere. His father laughing in a way he almost never laughed. He had not thought about that. It's afternoon in over 20 years. He did not know why he was telling her now. She listened without interrupting, which was another thing about her. She treated listening as an active thing, a choice that required her full attention, not a pause in her own speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "When did he die?" she asked. Nathaniel Marcus looked at her. 8 years ago? I thought so. She said it gently. You get this look sometimes when you talk around something, like you're describing the frame of a picture and being careful not to look at what's in it. He said nothing. "I do it too," she said. It's not a criticism. He had not gone looking for her that first Tuesday. That was the thing he came back to whenever he tried to construct a more guarded version of the story. He had been buying a sandwich. She had been in line. The entire thing had been genuinely accidental, which was either the universe being careless or, depending on your disposition, something else. But their second meeting, on the following Tuesday, had not been accidental. And the third had been a choice. And the fourth, in somewhere between the fourth and fifth, he had understood that the choice was already made, and the only question was how far he would let it go. She was 36. She had come up through hospital finance, moved into operations, then administration. Driven by a practical idealism that she wore without sentimentality, she believed healthcare systems could be less broken than they were. Yet she worked toward that with the steady, unglamorous commitment of someone who has accepted that the distance between here and better is very long and must be walked rather than leaped. She had grown up in a mid-sized city 3 hours north, in a family that was functional in the way that means nobody talked too much about anything too important. She had put herself through a master's program on grants and part-time work. She had been in one serious relationship several years ago. That had ended in the particular way that serious relationships end when two people are good for each other in every way, except the way that matters. She had told him all of this, not in disclosure. The way people sometimes unload themselves onto new connections as a kind of emotional toll, but in pieces, small, contextual, offered in response to his own pieces. A reciprocal architecture. You give me something real, I'll give you something real. He had given her Marcus Webb's pieces, which were real pieces of himself with the wealth and the structure and the armor stripped away. He told himself this made it honest. He was not sure in the long quiet of last night that he still believed that. At 8:58, she stood, because she had a meeting at 9 and she was never late to anything. He stood too. Whatever you came here to say, she said, pulling on her blazer, not looking at him. You don't have to say it today, Ellie. I mean that in the good way. She looked at him then. Not the way that means I'm not listening. The way that means I'm not going anywhere. You should have said something then. He knew it. He could feel the shape of the moment, its texture, its weight, the specific quality of an opening that would not stay open indefinitely. He said, "I'll call you tonight." She looked at him for one moment longer than she needed to. Then she said, "Okay," and picked up her folders and walked into her 9 o'clock. He left the hospital and stood on the pavement outside in the gray March air. A bus passed. 2 people walked around him without registering his existence. A pigeon conducted its abbreviated purposeful business near the curb. He thought about the gala. He thought about what he had heard. He thought about the way she had said, "I'm not going anywhere," with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone making a statement about geography. He thought about what he was, not Marcus. Not entirely. Not anymore, maybe. Whatever he was now was something that had been building for 11 months without his permission. Some third thing. Some version of himself that had begun to believe, against all available evidence and hard-won principle, that this specific woman might be the rare and improbable exception. The conversation from the gala came back. She saw an opportunity, and she took it. He turned it over one more time. The problem, the real problem, the one underneath all the others, was this. He was not certain they were wrong, and he was not certain they were right. And for a man who had built his entire survival system on the certainty of pattern recognition, that uncertainty was the most frightening thing he had encountered in 15 years. He started walking. He did not know yet that he was already wrong. He did not know that the conversation he had parsed and analyzed and weaponized against her 4-8 sleepless hours had been missing its first 60 seconds, and that those 60 seconds changed everything. He did not know any of that yet. He only knew he had told her he would call tonight, and that he was already composing the disappearance. He did not call that night. He told himself he was thinking. That was what he called it. Thinking, which was the word he had always used for the process of building a case against someone until the verdict felt inevitable. He was good at it. He had refined it over years of necessary self-protection into something almost judicial, methodical, evidence-based, emotionally detached. You gathered what you knew. You organized it. You rendered judgment before the damage could compound. He sat in the Fenwick Street apartment with the faulty radiator clicking in the corner and his laptop open to nothing. And he thought, the facts as he had them. Ellie Voss worked in hospital administration at Hargrove General. The hospital had been in a funding crisis for the better part of 2 years. He knew this not because she had told him, but because he had looked. Quietly. After the 3rd Tuesday on Clement Street, when he had begun to understand that looking was something he was going to do, the hospital's major donor relationships had weakened. Their annual gala, the Alderton, the one he had stood in the back of 2 nights ago, was their primary fundraising event. And it had underperformed for the last 3 cycles. He knew people. Marcus Webb did not know people, but Nathaniel Cade knew effectively everyone. And Ellie had, over the course of 11 months, been in his company on 4 or 5 occasions where other people had been present. Friends of Marcus, acquaintances, a neighbor's birthday gathering. He had been careful. He had not introduced her to anyone who might recognize the man behind Marcus Webb, or so he had believed. The Webb guy. He knows people. He closed his laptop. The thing he kept returning to was not the words themselves, but the tone, the matter-of-fact quality of it, the absence of surprise. As though it was understood? As though it was already a known quantity in some conversation that had been ongoing without him. He had been a known quantity. That was the phrase that kept arriving and refusing to leave. Somewhere, in some conversation he had not been part of, he, Marcus Webb, the fiction, the man with nothing, had been discussed as a resource, a connection, an angle. He stood and walked to the window. The street below was ordinary in the way that streets are ordinary at 11 at night. A few lit windows. A car passing slowly, the distant sound of something unidentifiable and unthreatening. He had chosen this neighborhood for its ordinariness. He had chosen this whole life for its ordinariness. The irony was not lost on him that the ordinary life had not protected him from the ordinary thing. People using people. The oldest and most unremarkable story in the world. He picked up his phone. Ellie had sent one message at 9:47, a single line. No punctuation, the way she always texted. Hope the thinking helped. He read it 3 times. He put the phone face down on the counter. The next morning, he went through the motions of Marcus Webb with the mechanical precision of a man performing a role he is already mentally resigned from. He went to the sandwich shop on Clement Street, not at the usual time because he was not ready to see her, but earlier, when he knew she would be at the hospital. He sat at the counter and drank coffee and watched the street and tried to locate, somewhere inside himself, the clean certainty he usually felt at this stage. It was not there. This was new. In the 11 previous iterations of this process, 11 people across 15 years who had been tested and found wanting. The discovery had always arrived with a kind of grim relief, the relief of being right. The relief of the pattern confirming itself, because a confirmed pattern is its own kind of safety. You are not surprised. You are not foolish. You simply saw what was there. He did not feel relief. He felt, instead, something closer to grief, which was both inconvenient and informative. You do not grieve things that were never real to you. He had not grieved the woman with the second phone or the business partner with the private files. He had felt anger, clean and finite, and then he had felt nothing. And then he had built another wall. The grief meant something. It had gotten through before the wall went up. He left the sandwich shop and walked, which was something Marcus Webb did when Nathaniel Cade needed to think without looking like he was thinking. He walked for 40 minutes through streets he had come to know over 11 months. The park where away had once made him stop to watch a dog failing to catch a frisbee. The bookshop where she had spent 25 minutes deciding between 2 novels and then bought neither. The corner where she had once stopped mid-sentence to help an elderly man whose grocery bag had split, moving with a swift, unthinking practicality that he had found in the moment. Almost unbearably decent. He walked past all of it, and he catalogued it, and he tried to make it mean less than it did. He lasted 4 days. 4 days of not calling. Of brief and carefully neutral texts. Of creating the kind of distance that could be read as busyness and not withdrawal. Ellie did not push. She never pushed. She sent the occasional short message, a dry observation about her day, a question about a book he had mentioned. Once a photograph of the dying plant on her office windowsill with the caption still hanging on, and each one arrived with the unpressured quality of someone who was present without being demanding this. He recognized somewhere underneath the case he was building was itself a kind of data. On the 5th day, she called him. He almost didn't answer. His thumb hovered over the screen for 2 full rings with the cowardice of a man who has made a decision and does not yet want to make it out loud. Then he answered. "I have a question," she said, without preamble. "Okay, did I do something?" He said nothing for a moment. Outside the apartment window, the neighbor's guitar started up, something slow and clumsy, chord progression that kept losing its way. "No," he said. "Okay." Pause. That's either true, or it's the kind of no that's actually a yes being protected. "Ellie, I'm not asking you to explain yourself," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm asking a direct question because I prefer direct questions to the alternative, which is spending 2 more weeks wondering." Other pause shorter. "If something changed, you can tell me. I'm a grown adult. I can handle information," he almost told her then. He could feel it, the shape of what honesty would look like. The way the words were already arranged somewhere just below the surface. "I was at the gala. I heard something. I need to understand what it meant. Simple, direct, the kind of thing that the man he was pretending to be would say. Because Marcus Webb had no empire to protect, no architecture of self-defense to maintain. But Nathaniel Cade said nothing changed. "I've just had a difficult week." The silence that followed was not long. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But he had been paying attention to Ellie Voss for 11 months, and he knew her silences the way you learn to read whether their texture, their duration, what they meant. This one meant she had heard not just what he said, but the shape of what he hadn't. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll let you have that, thank you." "Marcus." Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, more precise. Whatever's happening with you, I'm not fragile. You don't have to manage me. He closed his eyes. I know. I don't think you do, she said. But that's all right. We can get there. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing significant, her difficult meeting, his fictional work week, a film they had been meaning to watch. Easy conversation, the kind they had always had, the kind that felt like a door left open. When they hung up, he sat very still in the apartment, with the bad radiator and the clumsy guitar, and thought. About what we can get there meant coming from someone who had no reason to believe there was a we at risk. By the following week, the distance had closed again. Not because he had resolved anything he hadn't, but because being near her was stronger than his ability to stay away, which was itself a piece of data he was choosing not to analyze too closely. They went to the bookshop on a Saturday. She bought both novels this time. He made a remark about consistency, and she said, I changed my mind. That's different from inconsistency in the tone she used when she was right and knew it. They had coffee afterward at the place on Marchmont Street, with the small tables and the inexplicably good music. And she laughed at something he said in a way that involved her whole face, unself-consciously. And he sat across from her in the specific misery of a man falling further into something he has already decided to leave. He had not left yet. That was the operative fact. Every day that passed was a day he had not executed the plan. Every conversation, every message, every ordinary, unremarkable encounter was something he had chosen over disappearance. He told himself it was because he wasn't ready, that he was gathering more information, that the verdict was not yet final. He was lying to himself, which he knew, and could not stop. He did not yet know that in 11 days' time, at a small fundraising dinner that Ellie would mention casually, and he would agree to attend without thinking, he would overhear something that would collapse the entire structure, not the structure of his trust, but the structure of his certainty. He did not know yet that he would have it completely wrong. He only knew that on a Saturday afternoon in a bookshop, watching her read the back cover of something she had already decided to buy, he felt more like himself than he had in 15 years, and that this was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him. The fundraising dinner was not the Alderton Gala. It was smaller, 40 people in a private room at a restaurant on Helston Street, organized by a coalition of hospital trusts to court mid-level donors, the kind of event that does real work without the pageantry of the larger galas. Ellie had mentioned it on a Wednesday evening, casually, the way she mentioned most things that were simply part of the texture of her life. It's not glamorous, she had said. Mostly it's standing around talking to people about capital expenditure cycles, while pretending the con-ops are sufficient dinner. Sounds ideal, he had said. She had smiled. You don't have to come. I want to. And he had meant it, which was the problem. He kept meaning things. He arrived at Helston Street at 7:15, in a jacket that was Marcos appropriate, presentable but unremarkable. The visual language of a man who takes care of himself without advertising it. The restaurant was the kind that had exposed brick and low lighting and a wine list that required commitment. He was early, which was a Nathaniel habit that Marcus had never fully shed. Ellie was already inside, speaking to a woman he didn't recognize near the bar. She saw him come in and raised her chin slightly. Acknowledgement, warmth, the small private signal of a person who is glad you showed up without needing to make a production of it. He got a drink and moved into the room. He was good at rooms. This was one of the few places where Nathaniel and Marcus were identical. Both were practiced observers, comfortable in the margins, able to sustain conversations with strangers with the kind of attentive ease that people mistake for charisma, but is actually just genuine interest deployed strategically. He moved through the early part of the evening without difficulty. He talked to a facilities manager named Brendan about procurement systems. He talked to a junior consultant about her commute. He ate 3 can-apps and agreed internally that they were not sufficient dinner. For the first 90 minutes, he was fine. The room had a layout that its designers had probably intended to feel intimate. Clusters of low furniture. A long bar along one wall. A mezzanine level accessible by a short staircase where smaller conversations could happen away from the main floor. At around 8:15, T5, Nathaniel drifted upward toward the mezzanine because the main floor had grown louder and he had found. Over the years, that elevated positions gave you better sightlines and better acoustics. He stood at the mezzanine railing with his drink and watched the room below. Ellie was in conversation with two men he had not seen her speak to earlier in the evening. One was silver-haired, well-dressed, his particular bearing of old institutional money, a board member type, comfortable in his authority. The other was younger, sharper, with the watchful quality of someone whose job was to know things. A lawyer, Nathaniel assessed, or a financial advisor. The kind of man who attends these events not for the cause but for the room. He watched the three of them. Ellie was composed, professional. The version of herself she carried into work contexts still warm but structured, the warmth deployed with purpose. She was making a case for something. Her hands moved the way they moved when she was building an argument. She believed he should have stayed where he was. He descended the mezzanine stairs and moved toward the bar, which ran along the wall adjacent to where they were standing. He was not pursuing the conversation. He was getting another drink. He was simply moving through a room. The bar was separated from the conversation by a low partition of dark wood, decorative, not structural, the kind of thing that creates the feeling of privacy without delivering it. He placed his empty glass on the bar. The bartender moved to the other end to retrieve a bottle, and in the quiet gap, while he waited, he heard them, not Ellie, the two men, speaking to each other beneath the general noise of the room. Their voices carrying in the specific way that voices carry when the speaker believes the ambient sound is covering them and it isn't quite been useful. She understands the landscape better than anyone they've had in that role. The question is whether Webb is actually connected or whether she's inflated the RELATIONSHIP. Pause. Ice in a glass, she's smart enough not to inflate it. If she says he has access to the Cade network, she's probably right. The Cade network. The words arrived like a key turning in a lock. Specific, unmistakable. The name he had spent 11 months not being. Nathaniel stood absolutely still at the bar. The bartender returned with the bottle. He made some motion that caused the bartender to pour and retreat. If that introduction happens, it changes the funding picture completely. That's why she's been cultivating it, and she has no idea what she's actually dealing with. Doesn't matter. As long as the outcome, the ambient noise shifted, someone turned up the background music slightly, or a nearby conversation grew louder, or the universe made one of its small adjustments, and the rest of the sentence disappeared into the room. Nathaniel picked up his drink. He did not look at Ellie. He did not look at anything in particular. He walked, with the measured, unhurried pace of a man who is absolutely fine, to the far end of the room, where there was a short corridor leading to the coat room. And he stood in the corridor for approximately 90 seconds, doing the thing that he had always been able to do under pressure, which was to take the temperature of his own internal state before acting on it. What he found there was not the clean anger of previous discoveries. It was not the relief of a confirmed pattern. It was something colder and more structural. The sensation of a foundation shifting, not cracking, just moving slightly beneath him. The way the ground moves in a tremor and you think, oh, so that was never solid. The Cade network, she knew, or she suspected, or she had heard something, somewhere, and had been managing the information ever since. 11 months. He had been meticulous. He had been careful in ways he had never needed to be careful before, because Marcus Webb had been constructed with a precision born from 15 years of learned vigilance. The apartment, the job, the background, all of it built to hold. No connection that a standard search would trace back to Nathaniel Cade, but there was no such thing as a perfect fiction. He understood that now with the specific clarity of a man who has just understood it too late. She had known, or guessed, or been told by someone who had noticed something he had missed. And instead of saying so, instead of simply asking him, the way she asked everything, directly, without theater, she had continued. She had continued for however long she had known. Attending these events, speaking to these men, allowing the connection to be discussed as a professional asset, while sitting across from him in coffee shops talking about books she understands, the landscape better than anyone they've had in that role. He returned to the main room. Ellie found him 20 minutes later near the window. The two men were gone. She came to stand beside him with the relaxed ease of someone returning to a place she belongs. And for a moment, they were simply two people standing next to each other looking out at the city. And he felt the terrible doubleness of it, the version of this moment that existed if he was wrong, warm and ordinary and good, and the version that existed if he was right. "You disappeared," she said. "Just getting some air." She looked at him sideways. "There's no air in here. That's an outdoor activity. Mentally getting some air." She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "The silver-haired man was asking about you," she said. His grip on his glass did not change. "What about me?" "Whether you'd be interested in joining one of the Trust's advisory working groups. Apparently Brendan mentioned you'd had an interesting take on procurement inefficiencies." She shook her head slightly. "You made an impression on Brendan." "Brendan was easy to talk to. He is." A pause. "I told the silver-haired man I'd ask. No pressure. I know you're not looking for more commitments." She said it simply. No weight. No angle that he could identify. Just information passed along. A door opened. No insistence on whether he walked through it. He looked at her profile, the particular quality of her attention when she was watching something. The pen that was behind her ear again. The same pen? Or a different one? He had no idea it was always there. He had never once remembered to ask about it. "Ellie," he said. How long have you known?" He did not specify what. He let the question sit incomplete, because he wanted to see what she assumed it was asking. She turned to look at him. Her expression did not change in the way that guilty expressions change. No micro-flash of alarm, no recalibration. She looked at him with the same steady, direct attention she always brought to questions that mattered. "Known what?" she said, and he could not tell. He had spent 15 years reading people, and he could not tell. Which was either evidence that she was very good, or evidence of something else entirely. Something he did not yet have the architecture to hold. "Never mind," he said. She watched him for a moment longer. Then she looked back out the window. "Okay," she said quietly. And then, after a pause so small, it was almost nothing. "But you can ask me things, Marcus. I won't break." He said nothing. He stood beside her and looked out at the city and felt the decision forming, not with the sharp relief of previous decisions, but with the slow, grinding weight of something being done that cannot be undone. He would let it go, he told himself. He would let her go. He would do it cleanly, with the efficiency he had always managed before. He would disappear into the infrastructure of his real life and leave Marcus's Webb behind like a skin. He would do it tomorrow, he told himself. He had been telling himself tomorrow. For 11 months, he did it on a Monday. Not because Monday had any particular significance, but because he had spent the weekend manufacturing. Reasons to wait, and by Sunday night, he had run out of them. He lay in the Fenwick Street apartment listening to the radiator and the distant guitar and the specific silence of a decision already made. And when morning came, he got up and he began the process of ending Marcus Webb. It was not complicated mechanically. He had done it before, twice, in earlier iterations of the system. When the test had concluded and the verdict was in, and there was nothing left to do but close, there was a protocol, a series of quiet administrative steps that would, over the course of a week, cause Marcus Webb to become uncontactable, then absent, then simply gone. No confrontation, no explanation. Just a gradual fade, the way certain things end. Not with an event, but with a diminishing. Until one day, the space where something was simply registers as space, he had always thought this was the kind thing, the clean thing. An explanation required a conversation, and a conversation required honesty. And honesty required him to be someone he was not prepared to be. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the relevant accounts, the relevant contacts, the infrastructure of the fiction. He began making the first quiet adjustments, an out-of-office response on the Marcus Webb email, a message to the logistics company that the contractor assignment was concluding, A note to his building manager about vacating the apartment at month's end. He worked for an hour with the focused efficiency of a man who has decided. Then he stopped. He stopped because of the plant. He had been looking at his screen, and then he had looked up. The way you look up when your eyes need a moment, and he had looked at the windowsill. And there were no plants on his windowsill because Marcus Webb was not a man who kept plants. And the absence of them had made him think of Ellie's office. And the two plants on her windowsill, one thriving and one dying. And the fact that she had not thrown the dying one away. He had asked her about it once, the dying plant. Casually, in passing, she had looked at it with the expression she used for things she'd already thought about and reached a conclusion on. "It's not dead yet," she had said. "It's just struggling." Those are different things. He sat at his laptop in the apartment with the empty windowsill, and he thought about those being different things. He thought about a lot of things in the hours that followed. Not productively, not the organized, evidence-based thinking he prided himself on, but the other kind, the kind that moves in circles and keeps returning to the same images and phrases without resolution. He thought about her voice on the phone when she had asked, "Did I do something?" He thought about the way she stood in her office without a desk between herself and the person she was talking to. He thought about 11 months of small, unremarkable, genuine moments that had accumulated into something he had no good name. For he thought about "we can get there." Thought about what the men at the dinner had said. He thought about Ellie standing at the window beside him, saying, "You can ask me things." He thought about the question. He had asked, "How long have you known?" And the way she had said, "Known what?" without a flicker of what he had been looking for. He closed his laptop. The thing about being very good at reading people is that it gives you a particular kind of confidence in your own conclusions. You have been right before. You have caught things that others missed. You have seen the second phone, the private files, the quiet architecture of betrayal before it fully declared itself. Your pattern recognition has protected you in ways that are real and documented, and have saved you from damage that would otherwise have been serious. The thing about being very good at reading people is that it also makes you capable of extraordinary, motivated blindness. He understood this about himself in an abstract way. He had understood it for years, that the same mechanism that caught real signals could, under the right emotional conditions, manufacture them. That a man who has been hurt enough will eventually begin to find evidence of hurt everywhere, because the finding of it confirms the worldview. And the worldview is the last safe structure standing. He understood this abstractly. He had never, until now, had occasion to wonder if it was happening to him in real time. He went for a walk. He walked for a long time, longer than usual. Past the sandwich shop, and the bookshop, and the park in the corner, all the small geography of 11 months, and he tried to do something he was not naturally equipped to do, which was to hold two possibilities at once without collapsing them into one. Possibility one, she knew, or suspected who he was and had been managing the relationship accordingly. The men at the dinner were accurate. The cultivation was real. The warmth was real too, perhaps. In the way that warmth can be real and still be serving a purpose. Possibility two. He had overheard 60 seconds of a conversation he didn't have the context for, filtered it through 15 years of scar tissue, and built a verdict on a foundation he had not actually inspected. Both were possible. He was honest enough to know that. What he could not determine, and this was the crisis, the actual crisis, not the decision, but the uncertainty beneath it, was whether he was incapable of knowing. Whether the damage was so structural, so load-bearing, that he had permanently lost access to the kind of clear-eyed seeing that would let him answer the question honestly. He stopped on a bridge over a small canal and looked at the water, a man who cannot trust. His own perception is a man with a serious problem. He called his lawyer that afternoon. Not about Marcus, about a personal matter, something unrelated, a question about a property arrangement that had been pending for months. He didn't need to speak to her specifically. He needed to hear the voice of someone who knew who he actually was. Her name was Patricia, and she had worked for him for 12 years, and she was entirely uninterested in him as anything other than a client, which he had always appreciated. She answered on the second ring, dispatched his question in 4 minutes, and before she hung up said, in the tone of someone noting a weather change, "You sound strange. I'm fine. You sound like you did in 2019, before the Mercer thing collapsed." He said nothing. She said, "I just noted for the record." Pause. "Are you sleeping?" "Not especially." "Eat something," she said, with the brisk compassion of a woman who has watched him run himself into the ground before and has learned that practical instructions are more useful than emotional ones. Then she hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and thought about 2019, the Mercer acquisition. The 6 months of sustained pressure that had concluded in a boardroom where he had made 3 decisions in 90 seconds and all 3 had been correct, and the way he had felt afterward, clear, cold, precise. Like a blade that has been properly used, he did not feel like that now. He felt like a man standing in a demolished room trying to figure out which wall he had knocked down. Load dash bearing by Wednesday. He had not resumed the process of closing Marcus Webb. He had not contacted Ellie either. She had sent 2 messages in 3 days, both brief, both unpressured, both with the quality of someone maintaining a thread without pulling on it. He read them both multiple times and could not find in either of them what he was looking for, which was either the evidence of guilt or the evidence of innocence. And the inability to find either was its own kind of answer that he refused to hear. On Wednesday evening, the neighbor played guitar for an hour. He sat and listened. It was still clumsy. The chord progressions still lost their way. The same stumbles in the same places. A person working through something difficult by playing it again and again until the hands began to understand what the mind was trying to say. He thought about what it would mean to play something. Again and again, instead of putting the instrument down, he thought about 15 years of the instrument being put down. He thought about Ellie Voss saying it's not dead yet. It's just struggling. Those are different things. He picked up his phone. He did not call her. He was not ready for that. But he opened his contacts and he scrolled to a name he had not used in 3 years, a man named Daniel Assay, who had been his closest friend before the Nathaniel Cade architecture had made closeness feel like a liability. Daniel, who knew him before the system. Daniel, who had once said, with the gentle ruthlessness of genuine friendship, "The problem with your self-protection, Nate, is that it works." He stared at the name for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in a long time. Something small and structural and frightening. He pressed call. It rang 4 times. He was preparing for voicemail when the line opened and Daniel's voice came through. The same voice, older. Warm in the uncomplicated way of people who have not seen you in years, but never revised their opinion of you. "Nate," Daniel said, not surprised. Almost as if he had been expecting the call. "It's been a while." "It has," Nathaniel said. A brief silence. Comfortable. The kind that only exists between people who have enough history to not need to fill it. "Talk to me," Daniel said. And for the first time in 15 years, Nathaniel Cade did not organize his thoughts before speaking. He did not build a case or construct a narrative or present evidence in the order most likely to produce a useful verdict. He just talked. Daniel Assay had become, in the years since Nathaniel had last seen him, a man who had learned how to be quiet. This had not always been true. The Daniel that Nathaniel remembered from their early 20s had been expansive, loud in the good way, the way of someone whose energy fills a room not through dominance, but through genuine enthusiasm for being alive in it. He had been the person at every gathering who knew everyone's name by the end of the first hour and remembered them the next time. He had been, for a period of about 6 years, the most reliably joyful person in Nathaniel's life. Then Daniel had gone through his own version of the thing, different shape. A business that failed publicly and expensively. A marriage that didn't survive the fallout and had come out the other side quieter. Not diminished. Quieter in the way of someone who has learned that some things are better held than spoken and has made peace with the difference. They had spoken for 2 hours on Wednesday night. Nathaniel had told him most of it. Not everything, not the architecture of the system, not the full scope of what Marcus Webb was, not the specific geography of the financial world he inhabited, but enough. The essential shape, a woman. A disguise, a conversation overheard, a verdict he had constructed, a creeping uncertainty about whether the verdict was his own thinking or his own damage. Daniel had listened. He had asked 3 questions in 2 hours, which was the right number. Then he had said something that Nathaniel had been turning over ever since. The thing you're describing, the overheard conversation, the way you've been processing it, does it sound like the other times? Or does it sound different? Nathaniel had said, different, then that's worth paying attention to, Daniel had said. Different usually means something. It was Daniel who made the call. Nathaniel had not asked him to. He had not asked him to do anything except listen. And Daniel had done that, and then 2 days later, Friday morning, Nathaniel at the Fenwick Street apartment, eating toast and not tasting it, Daniel had called back. I spoke to someone, Daniel said. Nathaniel set down the toast. What do you mean you spoke to someone? You told me enough that I could ask a question without revealing anything specific. I have a contact. She runs in hospital philanthropic circles. She was involved with the Alderton Trust 3 years ago, before she moved to a different foundation. I asked her a general question about the political landscape at Hargrove General, about who the players are, about how the funding relationships work. Nathaniel was very still. Daniel, just listen. A pause. The 2 men you described, silver-haired, well-dressed board type, younger, watchful, legal, or financial, I described them to her generally. She identified them immediately. Apparently, they're well known in that circle. The older one is a board member named Hardcastle. The younger one is his deputy, a man named Frey. They have a specific reputation. What kind of reputation? The kind, Daniel said carefully. That involves identifying capable administrators and then cultivating relationships with them in ways that serve the board's agenda rather than the institution's. They find people who are good at their jobs. People who have real credibility and real relationships, and they work to bring those people's assets, contacts, influence, access into the board's orbit without those people necessarily understanding how they're being used. The toast was cold. Outside the window, a cloud moved across the morning. They use people, Nathaniel said flatly. They use people, Daniel confirmed. But here's the part you need to hear. My contact knows Ellie Voss, not well professionally, from 2 or 3 events over the years. She described her as someone who is extremely careful about exactly this kind of dynamic, who has, in her words, a finely tuned radar for people who want access to her relationships. She said a brief pause, the sound of Daniel checking something. She said that Ellie Voss is one of the few people she has seen actively shut down that kind of approach, that she has a reputation for it. Nathaniel said nothing. There's more, Daniel said. Tell me. My contact was at the Alderton Gala, the one you were at 3 weeks ago. She wasn't near you. She didn't know you were there, but she was in the room. She remembered the evening because of something specific that happened. She saw Hardcastle and Frey in conversation near the back of the room, and she remembers thinking they were talking about Ellie, because she'd heard they'd been trying to get closer to her for months. A pause. She also remembers seeing a man nearby. Near the alcove, she thought he was a caterer, standing near the service entrance, pretending to check his phone. She doesn't know who you are, Daniel said. She just described the setting. But Nate, the conversation you overheard, the 60 seconds you've been reconstructing for 3 weeks. My contact knows what Hardcastle and Frey were discussing that evening. She heard it too. Different part, earlier in the conversation. The part before the part you heard. The room was very quiet. Tell me, Nathaniel said. They were talking about Ellie, Daniel said. But not the way you thought. They were frustrated with her. They'd been trying for months to get her to leverage her personal relationships for donor introductions, and she kept refusing. Professionally, politely, but refusing. Frey said. Daniel paused again. Frey said she was protecting someone. That she kept deflecting any conversation about the people in her personal life with this very deliberate wall. They were irritated about it. They thought she was being unnecessarily precious about it. And then the conversation shifted to whether there was another angle, a way to approach whoever she was protecting from a different direction. The specific sensation of a floor that has been load-bearing, suddenly not being there. The part you heard. Daniel continued, his voice measured and careful, came after all of that. When they'd already established that she wouldn't give them what they wanted, what they were saying wasn't, she's been cultivating this angle. They were saying they were going to try to do it themselves, find whoever this Webb connection was, and approach him directly. Because Ellie had made it clear she wouldn't be the bridge. Nathaniel put one hand flat on the table. She wasn't using you, Daniel said. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Just honest, the way Daniel had always been honest. She was refusing to use you. For months, while they pushed, she kept saying no. He sat with it for a long time after the call ended. This was not the same as previous moments of realization in his life. Previous realizations had been the confirmation of suspicion, the second phone. The files, the restructured deal, all of them arriving as proof of what he had already suspected. The emotional work in those moments was not adjustment, but acceptance. The acceptance of what you already knew. This was the opposite. This was the demolition of something he had built and inhabited and relied upon for 3 weeks. This was standing in a structure he had constructed carefully and watching it come apart, not because it had been attacked, but because the ground it was built on had never existed. She had known, or suspected, that he was connected to something larger than Marcus Webb, and she had said nothing. She had not asked. She had not leveraged it. She had not allowed others to leverage it. She had, and this was the part that arrived last and landed hardest, she had actively protected him, repeatedly, from people who were trying to get to whatever was behind the fiction. While he sat across from her in ordinary places talking about books and believing, somewhere in the defended architecture of his psychology, that she was one of them. You can ask me things, Marcus. I won't break. She had known he was carrying something. She had left the door open and not walked through it herself, and not allowed others to walk through it, and simply waited. With the particular patient steadiness of someone who has decided that a person is worth the waiting, and he had been building a case against her. He was in the car before he had consciously decided to be in the car. This happens sometimes, the body making the decision before the mind had finished its arguments, which was either instinct or impulsiveness depending on how it turned out. He drove through the city with the focused automaticity of someone who has only one destination and is not thinking about the route. He was 12 minutes from the hospital when his phone rang. Through the car speakers. An unknown number, but a local prefix. He answered, "Is this Marcus Webb?" A woman's voice. Professional, neutral. Yes, he said, because he was still Marcus. For a little while longer, he was still Marcus. This is Donna calling from Hargrove General. I work with Ellie Voss. A brief pause. I'm calling because Ellie asked me to. She wanted you to know before you heard it somewhere else. He slowed the car without thinking. Heard what? He said. She's been offered a position, Donna said. At a hospital trust in Edinburgh. It's a significant step up, head of operations. She accepted this morning. Another pause. Smaller. She's leaving at the end of the month. City moved past the windows. A bus. A woman with a prom. A red light that he stopped at and did not move through when it turned green until the car behind him registered its opinion. Yes. She asked you to call me? He said, she said you'd want to know. Donna's voice had the careful neutrality of someone delivering a message. They understand the weight of without knowing its full context. She said to tell you a brief pause, something rustling. She said to tell you the plant is going with her. It made it. He sat at the green light. The plant, the dying plant on the windowsill. It's not dead yet. It's just struggling. Those are different things. She had kept it alive, and she was leaving. And she had sent word through someone else, which meant she did not expect him to call, which meant she had made a decision in the same silence he had been maintaining, and her decision looked very different from his. Thank you, he said to Donna. He ended the call. He sat in the car in the middle of the city and understood. with a clarity that arrived too late and too complete. Exactly what he had done. He had tested her. She had passed. And she had no idea, because he had never told her there was a test, which meant she had not passed anything in any way that could be seen or acknowledged or survived. She had simply been real, alone without witness, in the dark. While he watched from behind a fiction and called it caution, he pulled the car over. He sat for a long time. Then he reached into the glove box and retrieved a small notepad. A Marcus habit. Low-tech analog. The kind of thing a man carries when he is living a life at human scale. And he wrote one line on it, for himself, because he needed to see it in his own handwriting. She protected you and you were building the case against her. He looked at it, then he started the car again. He drove to the hospital. He knew, on some level, that this was not the right move, that showing up unannounced to the workplace of a woman who had just made a significant life decision and sent her message through a colleague was not the behavior of a man who understood the situation. It was the behavior of a man in motion, which was different. A man in motion has not yet thought about what he will do when he stops. He stopped in the hospital car park and sat in the car for 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, he thought about what he would say. He ran through versions of it, the honest version, the partial version, the version that was still Marcus, and the version that was finally Nathaniel, and none of them resolved cleanly. Every version required him to answer a question he had been refusing to answer for 11 months, which was, who are you actually to this person, and what do you want to be? He got out of the car. Donna was at the nurse's station. She recognized him. He could see it in the slight adjustment of her expression. The recalibration of someone who has just delivered a message and is now looking at the person it was delivered to. She was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular competence of someone who has worked in the same place long enough to become part of its load-bearing structure. She's in her office, Donna said, before he could speak. Then, after a brief pause, she has a meeting at 3. You have about 20 minutes. Thank you, he said. Donna looked at him with the direct assessment of a woman who has watched a lot of human situations develop across a lot of years and has earned the right to an opinion. Whatever opinion she had, she kept it. She just nodded once and returned to her screen. The office door was open. Ellie was at her desk behind it this time, not beside it, which he had never seen before. Papers in front of her, pen in hand, the posture of someone in the middle of something administrative and significant. The plants were on the windowsill. Both of them, the thriving one and the one that had made it. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Her expression moved through 3 things quickly: surprise, something more complicated, and then the composed stillness she used when she was deciding how to be. Marcus, she said. Oh. Can I come in? A beat. Yes. He came in, and she did not move from behind her desk, which he understood it was not coldness. It was self-protection, the desk-ass structure, as something solid to be behind while she figured out what this was. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the small office and looked at her and tried to locate the beginning of what he needed to say. Donna called me, he said. I asked her to. Edinburgh, he said. Edinburgh. She set her pen down. It's a good opportunity. Head of operations. The trust has been doing genuinely interesting work on resource allocation, and I've been following it for a couple of years. When they approached me, I said no initially, and then she paused, reconsidered. The pause where reconsidered lived was doing a great deal of work. When did you say no initially? He asked. She looked at him steadily. About 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, before the Helston Street dinner, before he had gone cold and distant and begun the slow construction of his exit. She had been approached 6 weeks ago and said no. Then something had changed, and the something had a shape he recognized because he had made it. Lee, you don't have to do this, she said. Not unkindly. With the particular firmness of someone who has already done the emotional work of a decision and does not want to have it complicated at the moment of its completion. It's a good opportunity, and I'm taking it. That's the whole story. It isn't, he said. She was quiet. I owe you something, he said. An explanation. Maybe more than that. But at minimum, an explanation. You don't owe me anything. She said it simply. We weren't, she stopped. Started again. We didn't make any formal agreements about what we were. You're allowed to pull back. People do. I pulled back for the wrong reason. Something shifted in her face. Small. Controlled. But there, it's the dinner at Helston Street, he said. I overheard something. 2 men, Hardcastle and Frey, talking about you. About your relationships? About access. He watched her face. I took it to mean you'd been using you, she said. The flatness of it. The way she said it without heat, without injury performed for his benefit. Just the plain word? Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her desk. Not away, not evasively, but at her own hands. The way people look at their hands when they are deciding how honest to be. I know who Hardcastle and Frey are, she said. I've known what they wanted for about 8 months. They are very persistent and very used to getting what they ask for. And what they wanted was an introduction to someone in my personal life who they believed had connections worth having. She paused. I told them no. Multiple times, in increasingly clear language. I know, he said. I found out after. That's why I'm here. She looked up. How did you find out? Someone who knows people who were in that room. Someone I trust. A brief silence. So you investigated, she said. Not accusatory. Noting it, yes, and the investigation cleared me. The word cleared landed with a precise, careful weight that he felt in his chest. Ellie, I'm not angry, she said. And she didn't sound angry. She sounded something more complicated. Something that had anger as one of its components, but also exhaustion. And something that might have been sadness. And something else he couldn't fully name. I'm not angry because I understand it. I don't know what happened to you, Marcus. You've never told me. But I'm not a person who needs someone to explain their damage to me before I can make room for it. She paused. What I can't do is be in a situation where the room disappears without warning, and I'm left trying to figure out what I did. You didn't do anything? I know I didn't, she said. That's what I mean. He sat down then. Not because she'd invited him to, but because remaining. Standing felt like a performance of something, and he was done with performances. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to let me get through it before you respond. Can you do that? She looked at him for a moment. Then she folded her hands on the desk, the gesture of someone giving their full and committed attention. Yes, he told her. Not everything. Not the full financial architecture. Not the specific numbers. Not the names of the companies and the assets and the structures that constituted the actual shape of Nathaniel Cade's life, but the essential truth. The system. What it was, why it existed, what Marcus Webb was built to do. 11 months on Fenwick Street, the logistics job, the background that held, the careful, methodical construction of an ordinary life designed to test the people who entered it. He told her about the previous iterations. Not in detail, not the second phone, not the files, but an outline. The general shape of a man who had been hurt in specific ways and had responded by building specific structures. He told her that she had been the only person in 15 years who had not behaved the way his system predicted. People would behave, he told her. That this had terrified him more than any betrayal. He told her that when Hardcastle and Frey had given him something that looked like the pattern he was waiting for, some part of him had been almost relieved, that the relief of a confirmed suspicion had arrived before the evidence was even properly examined, which told him something about himself that he was not proud of. He told her that he was sorry. He stopped talking. The office was quiet. Somewhere in the corridor outside, a trolley passed. Someone laughed at something distant and ordinary. Ellie had not moved. She had kept her hands folded and her eyes on him throughout, and she had not interrupted. And her face had moved through things he watched but did not try to interpret. Because he had been interpreting her face from behind a fiction for 11 months, and he was done doing that when she spoke. She did not speak immediately. She waited long enough that he knew she was answering the actual thing he had said, and not a reflexive response to the surface of it. I knew, she said. He waited, not the specifics, not who you actually were. But I knew Marcus Webb wasn't the whole story. Probably from around month 3, she unfolded her hands. The way you watched rooms, the way you asked questions, not curious questions, assessment questions. The way you never talked about money in the ordinary way people talk about money, which is constantly and complainingly. You talked around it, carefully. And then there were small things. Once you used a word, a very specific financial term, offhand. Mid-conversation about something else entirely, and then you clocked that you'd used it and moved on quickly. I noted it. You never said anything, he said. No? Why? She looked at him with the expression he had never been able to fully solve. Because I thought if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. And if you weren't ready, then pushing would just make you disappear faster. Pause. I was right about that last part, as it turned out. He absorbed this. I left something for you, she said. Before Donna called you. I'd already decided I didn't know if you'd come in, or call, or just receive the information and not respond. I didn't know what you'd do. So I left something at the front desk of your building on Fenwick Street this morning. I dropped it off before I came in. He stared at her. Before Donna called. Before Donna called, she confirmed. I was going to leave without a confrontation. I thought that was what you'd prefer. A slight emphasis on you'd prefer carrying. Very quietly. The knowledge of who he was and what he chose. What did you leave? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face that was not quite a smile and not quite grief, but lived in the country between them. Go read it, she said. And then she stopped. And then? He said. She picked up her pen. She looked at her papers. And in the gesture of returning to work, the composed, self-contained return of a woman who has learned to continue, he saw everything she was not saying, which was that she did not know, that she was not going to tell him what came after and then, that the end then was his to decide, and she was done deciding things for him. I have a meeting at 3, she said. He stood. He looked at her one more time. The pen. The papers, the 2 plants on the windowsill, the one that had made it, and then he walked out of the office and down the corridor and out of the hospital into the gray. Afternoon air, he drove to Fenwick Street. He took the stairs. On the small table. Inside the building's front door, beside the stack of uncollected mail and a dying succulent that belonged to nobody, it was an envelope. It was addressed in her handwriting in blue ink. To whoever you actually are. He picked it up. He sat down on the stairs. He opened it.
Please take a moment to like this video. It tells us that stories like this one matter to you, and it helps more people find their way here to this quiet space where real human stories live. Subscribe to True Heart Touching Stories so you never miss a story that was made to remind you of what matters. Every story we tell is for the person who needs to feel less alone in what they carry. That person might be you today. It might be someone you share this with. Either way, we are glad you are here.
The envelope was standard white, the kind you buy in a pack of 50 and use for everything and nothing. She had sealed it properly, not just tucked, actually sealed, which meant she had decided on its contents before she left the house this morning. It had not changed her mind on the way. He turned it over once. His name, not his name, the name she had given him. The name she had known was provisional and used anyway in her handwriting. The particular quality of her handwriting, which was neither neat nor messy, but precise in the way of someone who writes quickly and means every word, whoever you actually are. He opened it. I've been trying to write. This for about 3 weeks, which is longer than I've ever spent on anything I've written, including my master's thesis, which was 40,000 words and took 2 years. Make of that what you will. I'm not going to pretend I don't know something has been wrong. I think we're past that. I'm also not going to pretend I'm certain what it is, because I'm not. And I've never been someone who performs certainty they don't have. So this is what I actually know, and what I actually think. Then whatever you do with it is yours. I know you're not who you said you were. I don't mean that as an accusation. I mean it as a simple fact that I made peace with a long time ago. I know that Marcus Webb is real in the ways that matter, and not real in the ways that are administrative. And I decided somewhere around month 4 that the administrative parts were your business, and the real parts were what I was showing up for. I could be wrong about that. I don't think I am. I know that somewhere in the last few weeks something changed, and the change came from outside, not from between us. I know this because I know the difference between a person who has decided they don't want to be somewhere and a person who has been given a reason to leave that they didn't generate themselves. You were given something, a reason or what felt like one. I don't know what it was. Here is what I want to say about that. And I'm going to say it plainly because plain is what I have. I have spent a significant portion of my adult life being careful. Careful about who I let close. Careful about what I ask for. Careful about the distance between what I feel and what I say. I'm good at it. It has protected me from a number of things. It has also cost me a number of things, and I have mostly considered that an acceptable exchange. With you, I was less careful. Not reckless. I don't think I know how to be reckless. It's not in my wiring, but less careful than usual. I let the distance close in ways I don't typically let it close. I did this consciously, which is maybe the part I most want you to understand. It wasn't accidental. I knew I was doing it. I did it because something about you felt worth the doing. I want to be specific about what I mean by worth it, because I think this is the part that matters most. It wasn't the conversations, though the conversations were good. It wasn't the ease of being around you, though that was real. It was something more specific than that. It was the way you paid attention. Not too impressive things, too ordinary things. The way you noticed the plant. The way you remembered small things I'd mentioned in passing. The way you listened to people like what they said actually mattered to you. I've met a lot of people in my life who are impressive in the conventional ways, and I am not particularly moved by conventional impressiveness. What moves me is people who take the ordinary world seriously, who are present in it. You are present in a way I haven't encountered very often. I'm telling you this not to make things harder, but because I think you should know. I think you have spent a long time not knowing certain things about how you are received by the people who see you clearly. And I think that absence of knowing has cost you. So I'm telling you, you are someone worth seeing clearly. Whatever you are underneath the version you showed me, whatever the real name and the real life look like, I believe that. I believe it because what I saw was enough to believe it. Now here's the harder part. I can't wait in uncertainty. I've done it before with someone else, a long time ago, and I know what it costs, and I know I don't have it to spend again. I'm not saying this as a condition or an ultimatum. I'm saying it as information, the way I try to say most things. I am not a person who can live in the space between someone's availability and unavailability and be okay. I tried that. I know the shape of it. I know what it does to me slowly, so I'm going to Edinburgh. I made this decision before things went strange between us. I'd been offered the role and turned it down. And then I reconsidered, and I want to be honest that the reconsidering happened partly because of you. Not because of what went wrong, but because of what was right. Because being around you made me remember what it felt like to want to be somewhere fully, to be present in my own life instead of managing it from a slight remove. Edinburgh is that. That opportunity is that. I'm going toward something, not away from something. I want you to know that distinction. What I don't know is what you'll do with this letter. I have a version of events in which you read it and fold it up and put it somewhere and carry it quietly, and it becomes one of those things a person carries. I think that version is possible. I think it might even be the version you'd choose. Because I think choosing the version that requires you to be seen is the hardest thing. I could ask of you, and I'm not sure I have the right to ask it, but I'll tell you what I want. Because I think honesty is the only currency worth spending at this point. I want you to decide. Not to react, not to respond to pressure or guilt or the momentum of a dramatic moment. To actually decide. The full weight of who you are and what you want and what you're capable of. If the decision is that this was something real but finished, then I'll carry it as something real and finished, which is not nothing. That kind of thing is not nothing. But if there's a version of you that is ready to be known, not performing being known, in the ordinary and inconvenient and ongoing way, then I think that person would be worth meeting. I think I'd like to meet him. The plant made it, by the way. I'm bringing it to Edinburgh. Proof of concept, he read it once. Then he sat on the stairs at the Fenwick Street building for a long time and read it again. Slower, the way you read something you want to keep, not for information, which you already have, but for the specific quality of it, the texture, the proof that it existed. The building was quiet around him. The radiator in his apartment was not audible from here, but he knew it was clicking. The neighbor's guitar was silent. It was the middle of the afternoon, not the guitar hour. Somewhere above him, a door opened and closed. Someone going about the ordinary business of a day? He thought about 15 years. He thought about the system, its origins, its logic, its clean, effective function. He thought about the 11 people before Ellie and the verdicts he had rendered, and the walls he had built, and the version of himself he had constructed behind those walls, which was functional and protected and had never once sent word through a colleague to make sure a person knew they were worth knowing. He thought about his father, circling a cove in a rented sailboat, going nowhere, and laughing. He thought about whoever you actually are. He took out his phone, he opened his contacts, and he scrolled. Not to Ellie, but to his assistant, Miriam, who had worked for him for 9 years and was unflappable in the specific way of someone who has seen everything and assigned it all an appropriate weight. He called her. She answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd surface," she said, which was as close as Miriam ever came to expressing concern. "I need you to do something," he said. "That's generally why you call me. I need you to find out the logistics of a transfer to Edinburgh. Not permanently. A base, an apartment, something real, not a hotel." He paused. "And I need you to find a good hospital trust up there. One doing interesting work on resource allocation." A brief silence. He could hear Miriam processing this, not the logistics, which were trivial to her, but the implication, resource allocation, she said. "Yes, Matt. And this has nothing to do with any of our current portfolio interests in Scotland." "No," another silence. "Then, this is personal." "Yes." The longest silence yet? Then Miriam said, with the careful restraint of a woman who has earned the right to say more and chooses not to, "I'll have options to you by end of day. Thank you, Nathaniel." She used his name, which she rarely did. "It's good to hear your voice." The real one. He understood what she meant. He said goodbye and ended the call. He sat on the stairs for another few minutes, then he did the thing that had been waiting to be done since the beginning of all of this. The thing that all the architecture and the system and the careful protected machinery of his life had been, at its core, preventing. He took out the notepad. The Marcus notepad, small and analog and human scale. He wrote her name. Her real name, not the professional context he'd found it in, just the name. Ellie. Then below it, his own. His actual name? He looked at the two names on the same page, then he stood up from the stairs and he walked up to the Fenwick Street apartment for the last time, and he moved through its rooms, the kitchen with the bare windowsill, the living room with the second-hand furniture, the bedroom where he had slept badly for 3 weeks and well for 8 months before that, and he thought about what it had been, this life, what Marcus Webb had been, not a lie. He understood that now with a clarity he hadn't had at the beginning. Marcus Webb had not been a lie. He had been the version of Nathaniel Cade that existed before the damage, before the money became a variable in every equation, before the pattern recognition became a weapon pointed inward, before the walls. Marcus Webb was not a fiction. He was a memory of what Nathaniel had been before he decided it was safer to be less. He picked up his keys. He left the apartment. He did not look back at it, because the looking back was not the point. The point was the direction of movement forward, toward something. The way Ellie had said she was going, not away, but toward. He got in the car. Edinburgh was 6 hours north. He had no plan beyond the driving, which felt right. plans were for men who needed to know the outcome before they moved. He had been that man for 15 years. He had been very safe and very alone and very correct in his predictions. And the predictions had cost him more than the risks would have. He pulled out of the Fenwick Street car park for the last time. He drove north at the edge of the city, where the roads opened up and the buildings gave way to something larger and less managed. He felt something he did not immediately have a name for. It arrived quietly, without drama, a loosening, structural, somewhere behind the breastbone. The specific physical sensation of something that has been held for a very long time being, with great care, set down. He did not know what she would say when he arrived. He did not know if the timing was right, or if she would be ready, or if the distance he had put between them was a distance that could be crossed. He did not know if he was capable of being known in the ordinary and inconvenient and ongoing way she had described, though he believed, for the first time, that he wanted to find out. He knew that she had written, "I think I'd like to meet him." He knew that he was finally on his way to introducing himself. The road opened ahead of him, long and unhurried, and full of the particular quality of mornings that have not yet decided what they are. He drove into it, not arriving. Not there yet, just moving at last in the right direction.
Please take a moment to like this video. It tells us that stories like this one matter to you, and it helps more people find their way here to this quiet space where real human stories live. Subscribe to True Heart Touching Stories so you never miss a story that was made to remind you of what matters. Every story we tell is for the person who needs to feel less alone in what they carry. That person might be you today. It might be someone you share this with. Either way, we are glad you are here.